Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares with the news from the global economy. Coming up, Japan expands stimulus to curb deflation, and Ebola fears weigh on trade opportunities in Africa. First, the headlines. China is opening its interbank bond market to non-financial firms as it seeks to crack down on illegal transactions. Qualifying participants will require minimum net assets of $4.9 million and use a separate trading platform to banks, brokerages, and insurers. Wider investor participation in China's $4.3 trillion bond market may help lower companies' borrowing costs and curb demand for shadow banking products. China's bond sales totaled $775 billion in the first 9 months of this year, up from $739 billion a year earlier. German Chancellor Angela Merkel warned UK Prime Minister David Cameron she's prepared to consider a British exit from the EU. According to Der Spiegel, Merkel made clear to Cameron that any attempt to restrict immigration from fellow member states would lead the UK to the point of no return. Cameron had promised Britons he would impose quotas on low-skilled EU migrants, but might be modifying his initial plans to appease Merkel. Instead, Downing Street might deport EU migrants who are not able to support themselves within 3 months of arrival. According to the biggest ever UN report on climate change, humans are causing irreversible damage to the planet from burning fossil fuels. Chief economist Ottmar Edenhofer, who co-authored the report, said, "We need to get to zero emissions by the end of this century to keep global warming below dangerous levels." Though that would require a huge transformation in emissions reduction, it would only lower annualized economic growth this century by 0.06 percentage points, a UN panel in Copenhagen said. And that doesn't even factor in the benefits of reduced climate change linked to human health, livelihoods, and development.
And if we do nothing, then by the end of the century, you can see the substantial decrease in yields that would take place. And with a growing population and higher incomes, you can imagine food scarcity and food security and the whole issue of starvation and hunger become very large threats.
French advertising company Publicis Groupe on Monday offered to buy US-based Sapient for $3.7 billion in cash. Publicis said it had entered a definitive agreement to pay $25 for each Sapient share. By acquiring Sapient, Publicis, the world's third largest ad company, seeks to speed up its transformation into a digital technology company. Following the transaction, Publicis hopes to increase its digital revenue to more than 50% of its overall figure, gain access to new markets, and create new revenue streams. The Bank of Japan expanded its already aggressive stimulus plan in an effort to keep the country's economic revival on track. And while further easing in government spending are hoped to curb deflation, Shinzo Abe has so far failed to push through key structural reforms to boost sustainable growth.
Last Friday, the Bank of Japan surprised onlookers from around the world's financial markets when it announced an expansion of its already large-scale quantitative easing policy in response to a lack of growth and inflation after April's rise in sales tax. The Bank of Japan had been expected to hold present levels of asset purchases, but the decision was made after a Bank of Japan board vote of 5-4 to increase holdings by nearly $725 billion annually, up nearly $270 billion, according to the Reuters report.
We have decided to expand the monetary easing to ensure that the 2% inflation target is realized quickly.
In Japan, stocks jumped by nearly 5% after the news broke, and in the United States, stocks also rose, the Dow Jones Industrial Average going up 0.89%, and the S&P 500 up 0.93%. Japan's public pension fund, the largest in the world, also announced plans to drop some bonds and get into stocks, and the Ministry of Finance announced fresh stimulus spending, according to the Wall Street Journal. Consumer activity took a hit in Japan after the sales tax hike was implemented last spring, taking it from 5 to 8%. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has yet to make a decision on whether to hike up the sales tax even more this year. All of these government moves are not without risk.
There's
a little risk which might slow down the hard-fought gains in changing mindsets stuck in deflation. I can say that we are at the moment of truth, the critical moment, in the process of shaking free from deflation. As the Bank of Japan, we decided it was appropriate to expand the monetary easing to preemptively prevent the manifestation of this risk and maintain the positive upward momentum which is forming.
It is a turning point for the Japanese economy one way or another. Fiscal conservatives are worried about too much government intervention, while supporters of the moves see it as imperative to stay the course to put Japan back on an even keel.
And it's all about that base in Feminomics as Karen Kirsch joins us to discuss how weight influences financial success. Ms. Kirsch, thanks for joining us.
Well, Binyamin, we're always talking about how wage and women don't really go together. Well, we found...
Another W.
Another W, yes. We're getting close to the World Wide Web. Well, for women, being 13 pounds, which is about 6 kilos overweight, means losing $9,000 of salary a year.
$9,000?
Yes.
Wow.
That's really kind of a staggering piece of information.
Indeed,
At least it was to me.
Okay, I think we have some visuals that go with the whole weight thing. Yeah?
Well, one of the reasons I guess that this happens is that people ask, probably employers ask fat women, I'll say it bluntly, to hide.
Right, just so people understand, they're watching, we're seeing now a beauty contest also regarding
which is doing exactly the opposite, of taking, overweight women and saying, well, we shouldn't hide, we can be beautiful, we can be practical, we can be anything.
Right.
But that's one of the reasons, I guess, is that people, that employers would like you to hide. Maybe because being overweight is considered a social illness, maybe because it's considered unhealthy, or just plain unbeautiful. We have studies who show that beautiful people gain more money,
right.
Men and women.
Right.
But the question is, why for overweight women is it more difficult than to men? Huh. And when we look at the data in that, they checked also in this study, which was conducted by the Vanderbilt Law School, they actually found that half of male CEOs are overweight, while only 5% of female CEOs.
Interesting. I guess by men, it shows that they're rich. It shows, that they have enough to carry it, so to speak. Whereas by women, it shows that they're less
successful, maybe less, and they don't invest in themselves that much. It can mean a lot of things. It reminds me of ageism.
Take care of themselves less.
Yeah,
right.
Because for an older man is considered, to have
gravitas and wisdom and experience of years.
And an aging woman is just aging.
Right, I see.
Yeah. So that's kind of and to the question about the health issue.
Yeah.
There is a hospital in the U.S. who stated that they're not accepting to work employees, both men and women, over the BMI of 35.
What? How is it any of their business?
Exactly, that's the question.
I mean, it's a lifestyle issue, no?
You could say that it's a health indicator, which it is, but then you can also, smoking is a health indicator and drinking is a health indicator. And if you do enough, sports is a health indicator.
Right.
That's not places where I think work should go.
Right, so, absolutely, yeah.
That's stuff that we're scared about. And to a different story and a different study, an Israeli study that was conducted in America, that actually found that in the last 30 years, highly educated women have actually made more kids or gave birth to more kids.
They have bigger families. That's interesting.
Yes.
What are the indicators here? Like, why?
They actually went and checked, and they found it's really, really quite obvious that you have more kids, that there is a little gap in the middle between sort of totally uneducated women and women with a little education, and the reason to that, I'll say it really, really kind of quickly, that's the inequality gap, showing another face. If you're more educated, you might also be richer. You can afford to have more kids. Your partner will also have more money. and will be more educated and will be able to help more and give more money.
He's more likely to actually help more as well.
Yeah, in money as well. And also, you can use assisted reproductive technology which also costs more money.
Wow. Well, Karen Kirsch, thank you so much for telling us about the extra weight that has an effect here on financial situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Ebola epidemic has led Senegal and Guinea-Bissau to close its borders with neighboring Guinea. And as the economic consequences are starting to be felt, the agricultural area of Fouta Djallon, home to Guinea's renowned potato industry, has been hit especially hard. More in this report.
In Timbi Madina in central Guinea, potatoes are at the heart of the local economy. Fields of the crop stretch as far as the eye can see. But the Ebola epidemic is strangling the industry, as borders with neighbouring countries have been closed, making exports impossible.
There are no plans to open the borders, and the internal market is not booming. Everything's blocked. So how long do we stock products for? And what price will we be able to sell them at in the future?
The price of this local potato variety, known as the Belle de Guinée, has collapsed since the Ebola outbreak. It used to sell for around 50 euro centimes a kilo, but now the price has dropped to just 15. With no end to the epidemic in sight, some growers are delaying their harvests.
The market is not very strong, so people are waiting before picking the crops. Normally, if you'd come here, there would be no space to sit down. It would be full of potatoes.
Uncertainty also stalks the local markets, where traders are suffering a similar crisis of confidence. For many here, Ebola is not so much a health crisis as an economic one.
The production cost of potatoes is quite high. We're borrowing money all over the place. And if we lose money, we also lose hope.
We've lost a lot. It's been almost 4 months that we've been running around for nothing. We're not earning anything at the moment.
Almost 14,000 people have contracted Ebola since the start of the year. Around 5,000 have died, almost all of them in Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone. The World Bank recently lent Guinea $31 million in emergency aid to help cope with the crisis and hopefully go some way towards putting the country's potatoes back on the menu.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth for a discussion of other reports we called for you from around the world in Media Watch. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good.
So we got a piece from Israeli daily Haaretz to begin with by actually a friend of the show, Asher Schechter.
Oh, yeah. He's been on, yeah.
He's jumping into a documentary that an Israeli investor, is a guy named Yossi Hollander, made. He financed the whole thing. He's on a mission, this guy. In 1999, he sold a company, a software company, for $650 million. And now he's got the time and money to pursue other interests. And his interest is in destroying the oil industry, is in breaking apart the monopoly that it has, particularly over the U.S. economy. You know, if you look at the preview to this film, it says there's about 315 million people in the U.S. and about 215 million drivers. So, you know, you're talking about a huge industry, and what this film is really uncovering is that from the beginning, from the very beginning of cars, they were made so that they could run on oil or ethanol, on biofuels. And this is something people just don't know, really. So this is kind of the first level that this film delves into, is this addiction to oil to keep America's cars running is actually, it's all based on a falsehood, something that most Americans don't understand, which is that they can go to the pump, they can fill up with biofuel, with ethanol, and it's a whole other...
He just looks at America? I mean, because OPEC, I mean, obviously they were talking about countries around the world. We're talking about some of the most, you know, undemocratic countries, right?
Yeah, well, so this film is particularly focused on America and its addiction to oil, because America is the biggest oil importer. They spend the most money on oil, and he's actually the film is sort of suggesting. Take a look at Brazil, for example, which in the 70s, in the first oil shakeup, started to plan ahead and started to diversify the kinds of fuels they were using, which only really took effect in the 90s. But now Brazil is totally off their oil addiction.
Of course, an additional issue here is that America is an affluent country, and a lot of people have cars and have more than one car, for that matter, whereas Brazil is a generally poorer country.
Right, and you know, the other side of that that's not mentioned is that Brazil actually has invested enormous amounts in public transportation, which is one of the key factors here, is that people need to use less, because whether you're using ethanol or oil or electricity, it's all going into fuels that are being burned. Electricity in America, by and large, runs on coal. So one of the big factors is actually just using less, reducing the impact that way.
Okay, well, Daniel Roth, thanks for giving us more information here about global emissions and the oil industry in America. That is a wrap for us at The Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Join us again tomorrow for more on the economy.